smirked, swirling his iced latte, his eyes raking over her oversized sweater with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You really let yourself go, Chloe. You got fat." Chloe looked down at the slight swell of her stomach pressing against the cheap wool. She didn't tell him the truth. She didn't tell him that the weight was a 4-month-old secret. And she certainly didn't tell him that the father was the man currently running the city's underground. Let him think she was ruined. It was safer that way. The bell above the bakery door chimed, a sharp, cheerful sound that grated against the pounding headache behind her left eye. Chloe just wanted a cheese Danish. That was it. Her demands on the universe were incredibly low today. Her lower back ached, her feet were swollen inside her scuffed sneakers, and the nausea had only just subsided enough to let a craving slip through. She was at the counter, handing a crumpled $5 bill to the cashier, when she heard the voice. "Chloe, wow, it really is you." She froze. The $5 bill hung in the space between her and the teenager behind the register. She knew that voice. It was the voice that had spent 3 years critiquing her posture, her career choices, and the way she folded her socks. She turned slowly. Bradley stood near the display case. He looked exactly the same. Crisp navy suit, tailored to an inch of its life. Hair perfectly gelled. He smelled of bergamot and unearned confidence. Beside him stood a woman who looked like she subsisted entirely on kale and Pilates. "Brad," Chloe said. Her voice sounded raspy. She hadn't spoken to anyone yet today. His eyes traveled down from her messy bun, past the dark circles under her eyes, and landed squarely on her midsection. She was wearing a thick, grey, cable-knit sweater she'd bought at a thrift store. It was meant to hide the small, undeniable bump that had popped out 2 weeks ago, but it just made her look round. Bulky. Brad's eyebrows shot up. A small, cruel smile played on his lips. "It's been, 6 months?" he asked, stepping a little closer. He didn't introduce the woman next to him. "I heard you lost the lease on your apartment. I guess stress eating took over, huh?" Chloe took her paper bag from the cashier. The heat from the pastry seeped into her palm. "I'm doing fine, Brad," he chuckled. It was that patronizing sound he always made when he thought she was lying to herself. "You got fat, Chloe. Seriously, you used to be so dedicated to your cardio. What happened?" The Pilates woman looked at Chloe with faint, polite horror. Chloe looked at Brad. Really looked at him. A year ago, a comment like that would have sent her spiraling into a week of calorie counting and crying on her bathroom floor. Now, looking at his perfectly manicured cuticles and the shallow, empty judgment in his eyes, she just felt tired. "Yeah," she said softly, pulling the sweater a little tighter around herself. "I gained some weight. You should get back to the gym," he advised, checking his Rolex. "It's a slippery slope. Anyway, good seeing you. Take care of yourself." He turned back to his date, already dismissing Chloe from his reality. She walked out into the damp October air. The wind whipped off the street, biting through her jeans. She took a bite of the cheese Danish. It tasted like ash. She placed a hand flat against her stomach, feeling the tight, firm curve beneath the wool. "You got fat," Chloe closed her eyes, leaning against the brick wall of the bakery. If Brad knew whose child was currently growing inside her, he wouldn't have just lost his smirk. He would have lost his mind. And then, most likely, his life. A black Lincoln Navigator rolled silently up to the curb, tires splashing lightly in a shallow puddle. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. He didn't wear a tailored suit like Bradley. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, collar turned up against the wind over a dark turtleneck. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a quiet, predatory grace that made people on the sidewalk unconsciously step out of his way. Leo Moretti. He stopped a few feet from her. His dark eyes flicked over her face, registering the pale skin, the slight tremor in her hands. He didn't ask if she was okay. He never asked stupid questions. "Get in," Leo said. His voice was a low rumble, rough like gravel. Chloe threw the rest of the Danish in a nearby trash can and climbed into the warm, leather-scented cavern of the SUV. Leo slid in beside her. The door shut with a heavy, final thud, sealing them off from the rest of the world. The clinic wasn't a standard hospital. It was a private facility on the edge of the city, hidden behind high concrete walls and wrought-iron gates. You didn't just walk in with an insurance card. You walked in because Leo Moretti paid the doctors a small fortune to ask 0 questions and keep no digital records. Chloe sat on the exam table, the paper crinkling loudly beneath her thighs. She hated that sound. Leo stood by the window. He was a shadow against the grey afternoon light. He hadn't spoken since they left the bakery. He just stood there, arms crossed over his chest, watching the parking lot. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. Dr. Aris, a nervous man in his 50s who sweated profusely whenever Leo was within a 10-foot radius, squirted the cold gel onto her stomach. She flinched. Sorry, Miss Chloe. Just a bit chilly." Dr. Aris murmured, pressing the transducer wand against her skin. The monitor crackled to life, filling the sterile room with static. Chloe stared at the ceiling tiles. She didn't want to look at the screen. Looking made it real. Looking meant acknowledging that the chaotic, terrifying night 4 months ago in a locked back room of a casino, when she had gone to beg for her brother's life and ended up bargaining with her own, had permanent consequences. "There," Dr. Aris said, pointing a shaky finger at the monitor. The static morphed into a rhythmic, rapid thumping sound. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Leo turned from the window. He didn't rush over. He didn't smile. He walked slowly toward the monitor, his heavy boots silent on the linoleum floor. He stopped right beside Dr. Aris, towering over the older man. Leo stared at the grainy, black and white image on the screen. "Heart rate is strong, 150 beats per minute," Dr. Aris reported, swallowing hard. "Growth is exactly on track for 16 weeks. It's a healthy baby, Mr. Moretti." Leo didn't look at her. His gaze was anchored to the screen, tracing the blurry outline of a spine, a tiny fist. His jaw clenched. A muscle ticked in his cheek. For a man who orchestrated violence with the casual ease of a conductor leading an orchestra, he looked entirely out of his depth. "And the mother?" Leo asked. His tone was flat, demanding. "Blood pressure is a little low. Some anemia, but normal for this stage." The doctor stammered. "She needs rest. Iron supplements. Less stress." Leo finally looked at Chloe. His eyes were dark, fathomless pits. There was no affection in them. There was possession. There was an intense, suffocating gravity. This wasn't a romance. She was the vessel carrying his air. She was a sudden vulnerability he hadn't planned for, but one he would protect with lethal force. "Wipe it off," Leo ordered the doctor. Dr. Aris hurriedly handed her a wad of paper towels. Chloe wiped the sticky gel off her skin, pulling her shirt down. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the unsaid. Leo pulled a thick envelope from his coat pocket and dropped it on the metal counter. It hit with a heavy thwack. Cash. "We'll be back in 4 weeks," Leo said to the doctor. It wasn't a scheduling request. Chloe hopped off the table, her legs feeling slightly wobbly. Leo stepped into her space. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't touch her. But he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. She could smell the faint trace of gunpowder and expensive cologne. "You're pale," he stated, looking down at her. "I'm fine, just tired." "You threw away your food earlier." She blinked, surprised he had noticed. "I lost my appetite." "You will eat," Leo said. It was a command. "My child needs food. You need food." Chloe felt a spark of irritation break through her exhaustion. "I'm not an incubator, Leo. I'll eat when I'm hungry." His eyes narrowed. A dangerous, quiet stillness fell over him. Dr. Orris backed slowly towards the door, pretending to look at a chart. Leo leaned in. His voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "You will eat because I am taking you to dinner, and because if you collapse from anemia, I will fire this doctor and hire someone who will lock you in a bed until you deliver. Do we understand each other, Chloe?" It wasn't a threat of violence. It was a promise of total control. She swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded once. "Fine." He straightened up, adjusting his cuffs. "Good, let's go." The restaurant was called Laura. It was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu. The lighting was impossibly dim, the tablecloths thick and white, and the air hummed with the quiet murmur of old money and corporate power. Chloe felt ridiculous. She was wearing a black wrap dress Leo had sent to her hotel room 2 weeks ago. It fit her changing body perfectly, but she felt like an imposter playing dress-up. She belonged in diners with sticky tables, not in a velvet booth eating caviar. Leo sat across from her, nursing a glass of scotch. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't look at the other patrons. He looked at her. It was an unsettling, unwavering focus. "Eat," he said, gesturing to the perfectly seared filet mignon placed in front of her. Chloe picked up her knife and fork. Her hands felt clumsy. The ache in her lower back had intensified, sending dull throbs up her spine. She tried to cut the meat, but her grip was weak, the dull ache in her joints making the simple task frustrating. She dropped the knife. It clattered loudly against the china plate. A nearby waiter flinched, his eyes darting toward their table in sheer panic. Everyone in the restaurant knew who Leo was, even if they pretended not to. Chloe sighed, rubbing her temples. "I can't. My hands are swollen today." Leo didn't say a word. He stood up, towering over the table. The conversation at the adjacent booths faltered. He walked around to her side, sliding into the booth next to her. The heavy scent of his cologne wrapped around her. He reached out and took her knife and fork. His hands were massive, the knuckles white and scarred from years of brutal work. But as he cut the steak into small, bite-sized pieces, his movements were precise. Gentle. It was a jarring contradiction. The hands that had undoubtedly broken bones and ended lives were carefully cutting her dinner because her joints hurt. "Thank you," she muttered, feeling her face heat up. He didn't respond. He just set the cutlery down and slid back to his side of the booth. "Eat." She picked up the fork and started to eat. It was delicious, melting on her tongue, but the knot in her stomach made it hard to swallow. "How is your brother?" Leo asked suddenly. Chloe stopped chewing. Her brother, Danny, the idiot who had stolen from one of Leo's lieutenants to pay off a gambling debt. The reason she was in this mess. "He's fine," she said quietly. "Working construction in Ohio, keeping his head down." "He better be," Leo said, taking a slow sip of his scotch. "If he surfaces in my city again, the arrangement we made will not protect him a second time." She looked down at her plate. "I know. Their arrangement. She gave him a child, the heir he needed to solidify his position with the old world families in New York and Italy, and he let Danny live. It was supposed to be a clinical transaction. IVF, a surrogate, whatever it took. But the night they met to finalize the terms, the tension had snapped. Fear, adrenaline, the heavy, dark pull between them. It had ended in a hotel room. And now, here they were. No test tubes, just reality. Chloe took another bite of steak. As she chewed, her eyes drifted across the dimly lit dining room. 2 tables over, sitting with an older, wealthy-looking man, was Bradley. Her heart did a strange, uncomfortable stutter. Brad was wearing a different suit, laughing loudly at something the older man said, desperately trying to play the part of a high roller. He hadn't seen her yet. Chloe shifted in her seat, trying to angle her body away. She didn't want him to see her. She didn't want his sneering, pitying eyes on her again. Not today. "What is it?" Leo asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried the immediate, sharp edge of a man detecting a threat. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just thought I saw someone I knew." Leo followed her line of sight. He didn't have to scan the room. He zeroed in on Bradley instantly. Leo's eyes were like a predator tracking a weak gazelle. "The man in the grey suit?" Leo asked. "It's no one, just an ex. We ran into each other today at the bakery." Leo's gaze didn't waver from Brad. "Is that the reason you were standing on the street corner looking like someone had slapped you?" Chloe put her fork down. "I'm just tired, Leo. Let it go." "What did he say to you?" "Nothing." Leo leaned forward. The air between them instantly grew dense. "I don't like being lied to, Chloe, especially by the mother of my child. What did he say?" She looked into his eyes. There was no point in lying. He would find out anyway. "He said I got fat." Silence stretched over the table. Leo didn't blink. His expression didn't change, but the atmosphere around him dropped 20 degrees. The waiter, who had been approaching their table with a water pitcher, abruptly turned around and walked the other way. "Fat?" Leo repeated. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. "He doesn't know about this," Chloe said, gesturing vaguely to her stomach. "He just thinks I let myself go. It doesn't matter. He's an idiot." Leo slowly picked up a cloth napkin and wiped his mouth. He placed it back on the table with deliberate precision. "You are carrying a Moretti," Leo said quietly. The lethal calm in his voice made her chest tight. "You are carrying my blood. You do not lower your eyes to a man like that. You do not let a roach make you feel small." Before she could say anything, Leo raised his hand. 2 inches. Barely a movement. From the shadows near the kitchen, a man stepped forward. It was Vincent, Leo's right hand. Vincent was built like a cinder block and had eyes devoid of any human empathy. He approached the table silently. "Boss?" Vincent said, ignoring Chloe completely. Leo didn't look at Vincent. He kept his eyes locked on her. The man in the grey suit, 2 tables over. Leo murmured, "Find out who he works for. Find out who holds his mortgage. Find out what he values. Leo, don't!" she hissed, panic rising in her throat. "It was just a stupid comment. Please, don't hurt him." "I'm not going to touch him," Leo said softly, a dark, terrifying promise in his eyes. "I'm going to ruin him. There's a difference." Vincent nodded once and melted back into the shadows. Chloe stared at Leo, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had wanted Brad to stop looking at her with pity. But this was a level of retribution that terrified her. "Eat your dinner, Chloe," Leo instructed, picking up his scotch. "You need your strength." She looked down at her plate, realizing for the first time exactly what kind of world her child was about to be born into. The destruction of Bradley Hayes did not look like a Mafia movie. There were no broken kneecaps in dimly lit alleys. There were no severed horse heads in his silk sheets. Leo was a man of the modern age. He understood that in a city built on credit and reputation, violence was a blunt instrument. Bureaucracy, however, was a scalpel. It started 3 days after the dinner at Laura. Chloe was sitting in her hotel room, staring at the muted television, when her phone buzzed. It was Sarah. She was one of the few friends Chloe had kept from her old life, mostly because she possessed a cynical streak that matched her own. "Have you seen Brad's LinkedIn?" she asked the moment Chloe answered. No greeting, just straight to the gossip. "I don't look at Brad's anything, Sarah. You know that." Well, you might want to start, she said, her voice crackling over the line. He just got fired from Pierce and Caldwell, escorted out of the building by security. Total public humiliation. Chloe sat up, the dull ache in her pelvis flaring briefly. Fired? Brad was their golden boy. He practically lived at that firm. Not anymore, and that's not even the half of it. I talked to Jenny from HR. She said all of his corporate accounts were frozen pending some massive audit. Embezzlement investigation or something. He's toxic waste right now. No firm in the city will touch him. Chloe's stomach tightened. She looked toward the heavy oak door of her hotel suite. On the other side, she knew one of Leo's men was sitting quietly in a chair, reading a paperback, and waiting for her to need something. Wow, she managed to say. That's sudden. It's karma, Chloe, Sarah said, sounding entirely too satisfied. After the way he dumped you when your brother's stuff hit the fan, the universe is finally balancing the scales. It wasn't the universe. The universe didn't wear a wool overcoat and drink scotch. Chloe ended the call a few minutes later and stood up. The silence in the hotel room suddenly felt oppressive. She threw on a heavy cardigan over her leggings and walked out into the hallway. The guard, a young guy named Thomas with a broken nose and surprisingly kind eyes, stood up immediately. Miss Chloe, you need something. I need to see Leo. Thomas blinked. Mr. Moretti is at the docks today. It's not a place for you. Then take me to his office and I'll wait, she said. She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't leave room for argument either. 2 hours later, Chloe was sitting in the corner of a cavernous, glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. The leather chair was soft, but she couldn't relax. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the polished mahogany floor. The heavy glass doors swung open. Leo walked in. He stopped when he saw her. He hadn't expected her here. He was shrugging off a dark jacket, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked tired. A faint smudge of dirt, or maybe grease, or maybe something worse, stained his left cuff. He didn't ask why she was there. He just walked over to a wet bar in the corner, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass, and turned to face her. You ruined him, she said. Her voice sounded small in the massive room. Leo took a slow sip. He leaned back against the counter. I assume you mean the man in the grey suit. Bradley. His name is Bradley, and he just lost his job. His accounts are frozen. He's being investigated for embezzlement. Is he? Leo asked neutrally. Sounds like he made some poor choices. Chloe stood up. Her knees popped in the quiet room. You framed him, Leo. You took away his entire life because he made a comment about my weight. Leo set the glass down. The sharp clink echoed off the glass walls. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He stopped just inches away. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. I took away his livelihood because he disrespected what is mine, Leo said. His voice was a low, vibrating hum. He looked at you and saw a failure. He looked at my child and called it a flaw. I am not yours, Leo. She shot back, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. We have a transaction, an arrangement. I am carrying your heir, and in exchange, my brother gets to breathe. That's it. You don't own me. Leo looked down at her. His dark eyes flicked over her flushed cheeks, the rapid rise and fall of her chest, and finally, the undeniable curve of her stomach. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand. She flinched, an automatic response born of a life spent expecting the worst from men with power. Leo paused. A flicker of something dark and complex, regret perhaps, or anger at her reaction, passed over his face. He didn't lower his hand. Instead, he reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed her cheekbone. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was impossibly light. "You are carrying my blood, Chloe," he said softly. "In my world, that makes you family, and no one touches my family. Not with a fist, and not with a word. You need to understand this. The life you had before is gone." She swallowed hard, trapped in the gravitational pull of his stare. "He's just a guy, Leo, a stupid, vain guy. He didn't deserve to be destroyed. In this city," Leo whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "People are destroyed for much less. Go back to the hotel. Pack your things." Panic spiked in her chest. "What? Why?" "Because you are too visible there," he stated, dropping his hand and stepping back. The sudden absence of his heat left her shivering. "And because I will not have my child born in a Marriott, you are moving into the estate tonight." Leo's estate was located in a secluded enclave in Westchester, surrounded by acres of dense, ancient woods. It wasn't a tacky McMansion. It was a sprawling stone manor that looked like it had been carved directly out of the earth. High iron gates, discreet cameras tucked into the stonework, and men in dark coats walking the perimeter. It was a fortress, and Chloe was the prize prisoner. By her 6th month, the reality of her situation had settled into her bones. The physical toll of the pregnancy was inescapable. Her center of gravity had shifted entirely. She waddled more than she walked. Her back was a landscape of constant, dull pain, and the baby, a boy Dr. Aris had confirmed, treated her ribs like a punching bag. She was given a suite on the 2nd floor, down the hall from Leo. It was beautiful. Soaking tub, heated floors, a balcony overlooking a private garden. But the sheer silence of the house was deafening. Leo was a ghost. He left before she woke up, and returned long after she went to sleep. They existed in the same orbit, pulled by the gravity of the child growing inside her, but they rarely collided. Until a rainy Tuesday in November. It was 3 a.m. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of her bedroom. She was awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. The baby was restless, turning and kicking with a violence that made her gasp. Every time she found a comfortable position, a tiny heel would jam into her kidney. Chloe threw off the heavy duvet, groaning as she hauled herself upright. She needed tea. Peppermint, something to settle her stomach. She padded out into the dark hallway, her bare feet silent on the thick runner. The house was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of the storm outside. She made her way down the sweeping staircase and into the massive industrial kitchen. She didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. The glow from the under-cabinet LEDs was enough. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove. She leaned heavily against the cool marble island, rubbing small, frantic circles into her lower back. "You should be asleep." Chloe jumped, nearly knocking a bowl of fruit off the counter. Leo was sitting at the far end of the kitchen, bathed in shadows. He was wearing dark sweatpants and a plain grey t-shirt. It was the most casual she had ever seen him. He had a glass of water in front of him and a stack of manila folders spread across the table. "I didn't see you," she breathed, pressing a hand to her chest to calm her racing heart. "Clearly," he said. He closed the folder he was reading. "Why are you awake?" "He won't settle down," she said, gesturing vaguely to her stomach. "It feels like he's trying to dig his way out through my spine." Leo watched her. In the dim light, he looked younger. The harsh, predatory lines of his face were softened by exhaustion. He stood up and walked over to the island. He didn't stop on the other side. He walked around it, coming to stand right beside her. She stiffened, instinctively pulling back, but the edge of the counter dug into her hip, trapping her. "Show me," Leo said. "Show you what?" "Where does it hurt?" She hesitated. They had barely spoken in weeks. The air between them was always thick with the transactional nature of their relationship. But she was tired. So incredibly tired. "Here," she whispered, reaching around to press the flat of her palm against the base of her spine. Leo stepped closer. "Move your hand." She dropped her hand. Leo reached around her, his large, warm palm flattened against the exact spot where the ache was radiating. He applied pressure. Slow, firm, agonizingly perfect pressure. Chloe let out a long, shaky breath, her eyes fluttering shut against her will. The relief was instant. "You're carrying him low?" Leo murmured, his voice rumbling right next to her ear. He didn't move away. He just stood there, supporting her weight, his thumb pressing deeply into the tight muscles of her lower back. They stood in silence for a long time. The kettle began to hiss, a low warning before the whistle, but she didn't move to turn it off. She didn't want to break the spell. Suddenly her stomach contorted. A sharp, distinct kick hit the side of her belly. Leo felt it. He had to have felt it through the thin fabric of her nightgown, because his other hand, the one that wasn't massaging her back, twitched. Slowly, carefully, he brought his free hand around and placed it flat against the swell of her stomach. The baby kicked again, right against Leo's palm. Leo went completely still. The man who ordered executions and controlled millions of dollars with a wave of his hand froze at the push of a tiny, unborn foot. She opened her eyes and looked up at him. His face was a mask of intense concentration. He was staring down at his hand, resting on her stomach, as if he had just discovered fire. "He's strong," Leo said. It wasn't a boast. It was a quiet revelation. "He never stops moving," she whispered. Leo shifted his gaze from her stomach to her face. They were so close. She could smell the faint trace of soap and the clean, sharp scent of rain on his skin. There were dark circles under his eyes, mirroring her own. For the first time since the night in the casino, Chloe didn't see the Mafia boss. She saw a man staring at the mother of his child. She saw the terrifying, inescapable weight of gravity pulling them toward each other. His hand lingered on her stomach for a second longer. Then, as quickly as the moment had formed, he pulled away. He took a step back, the cold air rushing in to fill the space between them. He reached over and turned off the stove. The hissing of the kettle died. "Make your tea, Chloe," Leo said. The rough, commanding edge had returned to his voice. "Then go to sleep." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, taking the shadows with him. She stood alone in the dim light, her back throbbing again, her hand resting exactly where his had been. The arrangement was supposed to be simple. But as she rubbed the tight curve of her belly, she knew she was in far deeper than she ever planned to be. The third trimester hit her like a freight train. By her 8th month, Chloe felt less like a human woman and more like a heavily armored transport vehicle. Her ankles were permanently swollen, breathing required conscious effort, and her patience was entirely non-existent. She was losing her mind inside the stone walls of the estate. "I am going to the city," she announced to Vincent one crisp Tuesday morning. Vincent, who was standing by the front door reviewing a security log on an iPad, didn't even look up. "No, you aren't." "Vincent," she said, putting her hands on her hips and trying to look authoritative. It was difficult when she resembled a distressed penguin. "I have not left this property in 2 months. I need to walk on pavement. I need to see people who are not carrying concealed firearms. I am going to Central Park, or I am going to set this sofa on fire." Vincent finally looked at her. His dead, shark-like eyes assessed her threat level. He sighed heavily, the sound of a man severely underpaid for his troubles. "I will call the boss," Vincent muttered. 10 minutes later, she was in the back of an armored SUV, sandwiched between 2 massive guards heading toward Manhattan. The compromise was simple. She could go to the park, but she had to stay on the main paths, and the guards, Dante and Paul, would remain exactly 3 steps behind her at all times. She didn't care. She just wanted to feel the cold city air on her face. Central Park was beautiful in late winter. The trees were bare, their branches reaching up like black veins against the pale grey sky. The air smelled of roasted nuts and exhaust fumes. To her, it smelled like freedom. She bought a hot pretzel from a vendor near Bethesda Terrace. She sat heavily on a green wooden bench, tearing off chunks of the warm, salty dough. Dante and Paul stood a few feet away, attempting to look like casual park-goers despite their bulging coats and earpieces. She closed her eyes, chewing slowly, letting the ambient noise of the city wash over her. The chatter of tourists, the distant honk of a cab, the rustle of dry leaves on the pavement. "Chloe?" The voice cut through the noise like a rusty blade. Her eyes snapped open. The pretzel turned to ash in her mouth. Standing 10 feet away was Bradley. But it wasn't the Bradley she remembered. The crisp navy suit was gone. He wore a rumpled grey trench coat over a stained sweater. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was unkempt and hanging in his eyes. He looked thinner, his face drawn, a frantic, wild energy vibrating off him. He looked like a man who had lost everything. "Brad," she said, her voice barely a croak. He took a step closer. His eyes were wide, darting from her face to the massive swell of her winter coat, which did nothing to hide the 9-month pregnant belly beneath it. "I knew it," he hissed, taking another step. "I knew it was you." Dante and Paul instantly closed the distance. Dante stepped smoothly between her and Brad, his hand resting casually inside his jacket. "Step back, buddy," Dante said. His tone was polite, but his eyes promised violence. Brad ignored him. He tried to peer around Dante's broad shoulders to look at her. "You did this! You ruined my life! I don't know who you slept with. I don't know what kind of sick people you got involved with, but they destroyed me!" Chloe's heart hammered in her throat. She placed a protective hand over her stomach. "Brad, go away! Leave me alone!" "Leave you alone?" Brad laughed. It was a harsh, broken sound. "I lost my job. The feds took my apartment. My fiancé left me. And it all started the day I ran into you at that bakery. You sent them after me because I hurt your feelings?" "I didn't send anyone," she said, her voice shaking. "You did this to yourself, Brad. You ran your mouth. You fat, pathetic—" Brad lunged forward. It happened so fast she barely had time to blink. Brad didn't even get within 3 feet of her. Paul grabbed Brad by the collar of his trench coat and slammed him face first into the trunk of a massive oak tree. The sound of bone hitting wood cracked through the cold air. Brad screamed, a pathetic, high-pitched yelp as Paul pinned his arms behind his back with terrifying efficiency. Tourists nearby gasped and scattered. A woman holding a poodle shrieked and ran in the opposite direction. "Hold him," a voice commanded. The air in the park suddenly felt heavier. Chloe turned her head. Leo was walking down the paved path. He didn't look like he was hurrying, but he covered the ground with predatory speed. He wore a black cashmere overcoat, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He must have been nearby. Vincent must have told him exactly where she was going. Leo walked past her without a glance. He stopped right behind Brad, who was struggling and bleeding from the nose against the rough bark of the tree. "Mr. Hayes," Leo said softly. Brad froze. Even pinned against a tree, the pure, lethal authority in Leo's voice commanded absolute obedience. Brad twisted his head slightly, trying to look back. Who are you?" Brad stammered, blood dripping down his chin. "I am the man who took your job. I am the man who froze your accounts. I am the man who ensured you will never work in a white-collar firm in this hemisphere again, Leo stated casually, as if reading a grocery list. Brad's eyes widened in horror. Why? I don't even know you! Leo stepped closer, leaning in so his mouth was right next to Brad's ear. Because you looked at my woman, carrying my son, and you called her fat. The words hung in the freezing air. Brad stopped struggling. His entire body went slack against the tree. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head as much as Paul's grip allowed and looked at Chloe. He looked at the cheap winter coat, stretched tight over the massive bump. He looked at her swollen face. And then he looked at the terrified, silent men holding him, and the impeccably dressed nightmare standing behind him. The realization hit Brad like a physical blow. The fat wasn't weight gain. It was an heir to an empire built on blood and shadow. And he had mocked it. Oh, God! Brad whimpered, tears mixing with the blood on his face. Oh, my God! Chloe! I didn't know! Let him go, Leo ordered. Paul instantly released him. Brad slumped to his knees on the freezing pavement, gasping for air, clutching his bleeding nose. He looked up at Chloe, begging for mercy he didn't deserve. Chloe, please, Brad sobbed. Tell him it was a joke. We used to be in love. She looked down at the man who had made her feel so small, so worthless for 3 years. She felt no pity. She felt no satisfaction. She just felt tired of him. She looked at Leo. I want to go home. Leo didn't take his eyes off Brad. Get her in the car, he told Dante. Dante gently took her elbow, guiding her away from the scene. As she walked away, her heavy boots crunching on the dry leaves, she heard Leo's voice drift over the cold wind. If you ever speak her name again. Leo whispered to the trembling man on the ground. I will not take your bank accounts. I will take your hands. Chloe climbed into the warm, leather-scented back of the SUV. The door shut heavily, sealing her inside the only world she belonged to now. The heavy door of the SUV opened, letting in a sharp gust of wind before Leo slid onto the leather seat beside her. He didn't speak. He stared straight ahead, his chest rising and falling in slow, controlled increments. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving Central Park and Bradley Hayes behind in a blur of grey trees and cold pavement. The silence inside the car was thick enough to choke on. The heater hummed, pushing warm air against her frozen ankles. Her heart was still beating too fast, sending a chaotic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at Leo. The profile of his face was carved from granite. Unforgiving. My woman! She rasped. The words tasted metallic in her mouth. Leo slowly turned his head. His dark eyes met hers. He didn't blink. He didn't offer a retraction or a polite excuse about putting on a show for Brad. Yes, Leo said. A simple, heavy syllable. We have a deal, Leo. An arrangement. I'm a surrogate for your heir. I'm not your property. You are carrying my son. You sleep under my roof. You eat at my table. My men bleed to keep you breathing. Leo stated, his voice dropping to a low, rough pitch that vibrated against the leather seats. You stopped being a transaction the day you walked into that clinic with me. I never agreed to this, she whispered, shrinking back slightly against the cold window. You didn't have to. Leo reached across the space between them. His large hand covered both of hers, resting on the swell of her stomach. His skin was warm. The world outside this car is done with you, Chloe. It will eat you alive just to get to me. You belong in my world now. It wasn't a romantic declaration. It was a tactical truth. And it terrified her, mostly because a dark, deeply buried part of her felt a profound sense of relief. She was tired of fighting. She was tired of being the punchline in Bradley's life, the collateral damage in her brother's life. Here, in the dark, terrifying shadow of Leo Moretti, She was untouchable. They arrived at the estate as the first flakes of a heavy February snow began to fall. The grounds were silent, the bare trees coated in a thin layer of frost. The next 3 weeks were a slow, agonizing blur. Her body was giving out. The baby was too big, pressing against her lungs so hard that drawing a full breath felt like a luxury. The dull ache in her back had sharpened into a constant biting pain. She spent her days moving between the bed and a large wing-back chair by the window, watching the snow pile up against the iron gates. Leo changed. The ghost who haunted the edges of her peripheral vision vanished. Instead, he was a constant presence. He moved his meetings to the library on the first floor. He ate dinner in her room, sitting in a wooden chair while she picked at heavily iron-fortified meals the chef prepared. He didn't hover. He didn't ask stupid questions about how she felt. But when she winced, trying to shift her weight, he was there. A heavy hand on her lower back. A quiet command to a maid to bring more pillows. It was a Tuesday evening, just past 9 o'clock. The estate was locked down for a blizzard. The wind howled against the reinforced glass of her bedroom windows, rattling the heavy frames. She was standing by the edge of the bed, trying to stretch the cramped muscles in her calves. Leo was sitting in the armchair, reading a leather-bound ledger. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the scratch of his pen against paper. A sharp, violent pain tore through her lower abdomen. It wasn't the dull ache she was used to. It felt like a hot knife twisting into her pelvis. She gasped, her knees buckling instantly. She grabbed the heavy mahogany bedpost, her knuckles turning white as she tried to stay upright. Leo. The ledger hit the floor with a heavy thud. Leo was across the room in a second. He caught her just as her legs gave out completely. His arms wrapped around her shoulders and beneath her knees, lifting her dead weight effortlessly. "Breathe," he ordered. His voice was clipped, carrying a sharp edge of adrenaline. "It hurts," she choked out, squeezing her eyes shut as a second wave of agony rolled over her, tighter and more vicious than the first. He laid her gently on the bed. She felt the mattress sink under his weight as he leaned over her. She opened her eyes. Leo's face was inches from hers, his eyes scanning her with rapid, clinical precision. Then she felt the wetness soaking through her sweatpants, pooling hot and sticky against her thighs. Leo looked down. His jaw locked. He didn't panic. He didn't yell. He pulled his phone from his pocket, hit a single button, and pressed it to his ear. "Bring Aris to the medical wing, now. Tell Vincent to lock down the perimeter. No one goes in or out." Leo threw the phone onto the nightstand. He looked back down at her, his massive hands gripping her shoulders. "Look at me, Chloe." She opened her eyes. Her vision was swimming. The pain was a living, breathing thing inside the room, sucking out all the oxygen. "You are going to be fine," Leo said, his voice a low rumble that anchored her to the bed. "I am not going to let anything happen to you." He didn't wait for a response. He scooped her up into his arms again and carried her out into the dark, silent hallway. The medical wing in the basement of the estate was not a makeshift infirmary. It was a fully sterile, state-of-the-art trauma center. Stainless steel counters gleamed under harsh, white fluorescent lights. The smell of bleach and antiseptic burned the inside of her nose. Leo laid her on the delivery bed. The paper crinkled loudly underneath her, triggering a sudden absurd memory of the first ultrasound clinic. Dr. Aris rushed through the double doors a minute later, still wearing a heavy winter coat over his scrubs, snow dusting his grey hair. 2 nurses flanked him, their faces pale and tight with anxiety. "Blood pressure is spiking," the older nurse said, wrapping a cuff tightly around her bicep. Another contraction hit. She screamed. She didn't care about dignity. She didn't care about the stoic, silent men guarding the door. The pain was absolute. It felt like her bones were being pulled apart from the inside. She arched her back, her fingers digging frantically into the thin mattress. 10 centimeters. She's fully dilated. It's happening now. Dr. Aris barked, stripping off his coat and pulling on sterile gloves. She was drowning in the pain. Sweat stung her eyes, blurring the harsh lights above her. Her body was completely out of her control, hijacked by the biological imperative to get the child out. She reached out blindly, her hand flailing in the empty air beside the bed. She needed something to anchor her. She needed to hold on to something before the pain pulled her entirely under. A hand caught hers. It was massive, rough, and hot. Leo. She gripped his hand with every ounce of strength she possessed. She felt her fingernails dig into his skin, searching for purchase. He didn't pull away. He stepped closer to the head of the bed, planting his feet on the linoleum floor like a stone pillar. "Push, Chloe," Dr. Aris instructed, his voice tight. She bore down. A primal, guttural sound ripped from her throat. The pressure in her skull felt like it was going to shatter her teeth. She squeezed Leo's hand until her own knuckles popped, silently begging him to take the pain away. "Good, good. Again," the doctor urged. Time fractured. It could have been 10 minutes or 3 hours. The room became a sensory nightmare of blood, sweat, and screaming. She was exhausted, her muscles trembling so violently her teeth chattered. "I can't," she sobbed, letting her head fall back against the sweat-soaked pillow. "I can't do it anymore." Leo leaned down. The heavy scent of his cologne cut through the sterile smell of the room. His face was inches from hers. He wasn't looking at the doctor. He wasn't looking at the blood. He was looking only at her. "You can," Leo whispered harshly, his voice cutting through the panic buzzing in her ears. "You survived the streets. You survived your brother's mess. You survived me. You are not weak, Chloe. Push." It wasn't comfort. It was a challenge, and it was exactly what she needed. A fresh wave of anger mixed with the pain. Anger at the situation, anger at her body, anger at the ruthless man holding her hand. She squeezed her eyes shut, gripped his hand until she felt his skin break under her nails, and pushed with a violent, terrifying force. "The head is out!" Dr. Aris yelled. "One more! Give me one more!" She drew a ragged, desperate breath and gave everything she had left. The pressure peaked, blinding and absolute, and then suddenly it was gone. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. Then a sound pierced the quiet room. A sharp, angry wail. She slumped back onto the mattress, her chest heaving, tears tracking hot and fast down her temples. She couldn't move. She felt entirely hollowed out. "A boy," Dr. Aris announced, his shoulders dropping in a massive sigh of relief. "A healthy, loud boy." She turned her head weakly. The nurse was rapidly wiping down a tiny, furious red creature. He was thrashing his limbs, screaming at the harsh lights and the cold air. She looked up at Leo. He was staring at the baby. The ruthless, untouchable boss of the city's underworld looked completely paralyzed. The muscle in his jaw ticked. He slowly looked down at his right hand. She was still holding it. Her nails had dug deep, half-moon crescents into his knuckles, drawing tiny beads of blood. He didn't pull away. He just looked from his bleeding hand back to her. The heavy, dark void in his eyes had cracked wide open, revealing something raw and terrifyingly human beneath. The nurse wrapped the screaming baby in a white blanket and walked tentatively toward the head of the bed. She looked at Leo, clearly terrified to hand the child to him, but unsure if she should bypass him for Chloe. Leo didn't hesitate. He held out his arms. His massive hands, which had ended lives and broken empires, looked absurdly large holding the tiny bundle. He brought the baby close to his chest. The child's wails instantly quieted to soft, breathless hiccups. Leo stared down at the small, wrinkled face. He gently brushed a thumb over the boy's cheek. Dominic, Leo murmured. The name sounded heavy, ancient, and completely right. He lowered his arms, bringing the baby down to her chest. She felt the warm, solid weight of her son settle against her collarbone. She wrapped her trembling arms around him, burying her face in the soft, damp hair on his head. He smelled like blood and milk and life. Leo didn't step back. He stood leaning over the bed, his arms resting on either side of her pillow, caging her and the baby in a protective alcove. She looked up at him. The exhaustion was pulling her under, her eyelids feeling like lead. "You did well," Leo said quietly. It was the highest praise she had ever heard him give. She closed her eyes, letting the darkness pull her down into sleep, anchored by the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the two men who now owned her entire world. The estate was quiet the next morning. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a blindingly white landscape that reflected bright, sharp sunlight through the heavy curtains of her bedroom. She woke up slowly. The pain was still there, a dull, throbbing ache between her hips, but the terrifying pressure was gone. She felt light, empty. She turned her head. Leo was sitting in the same armchair by the window. He hadn't changed clothes. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair messy. In his arms, swaddled in a dark, grey blanket, was Dominic. Leo wasn't reading a ledger, he wasn't on his phone, he was just watching his son sleep. His large index finger was trapped in the tiny, vice-like grip of Dominic's fist. She shifted on the mattress. The sheets rustled. Leo looked up instantly. The predatory awareness never fully slept. "You're awake," he said, keeping his voice low. "How long was I out?" she asked, her throat dry and scratchy. 12 hours. Aris came by twice. You're recovering well." Leo stood up slowly, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. He walked over to the bed and gently laid Dominic next to her. She stared down at her son. He was perfect. He had Leo's dark hair, but his nose, small and stubborn, was entirely hers. She touched his cheek, marveling at the impossible softness of his skin. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He is strong," Leo corrected, though a faint, almost imperceptible softness touched the corner of his mouth. Leo walked over to the small table in the corner and poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. He brought it to the bed, handing it to her. She sat up slowly, wincing as her bruised muscles protested. She drank the water, the cool liquid soothing the rawness in her throat. She handed the glass back to him. Their fingers brushed. He didn't pull away. Leo set the glass on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the mattress. The bed dipped under his weight. He looked at Dominic, then at her. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the unsaid things they had spent the last 9 months avoiding. "The arrangement," Leo started, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Her chest tightened. Here it was. The reality check. She had delivered the heir. The transaction was complete. "I've set up a trust," Leo continued, not looking at her. $10 million. It unlocks in increments over the next 20 years. The house in the Hamptons is in your name. If you want to leave the city, Vincent will arrange secure transport. You will never have to worry about money or your brother ever again. She stared at him. The cold, clinical tone felt like a physical slap. After the intimacy of the night before, after he held her hand while she bled and screamed, he was reverting to a spreadsheet. "You're paying me off," she said softly. Leo finally looked at her. His eyes were dark, fathomless pits. "I am securing your future." That was the deal. The deal! she repeated bitterly. She looked down at Dominic. The baby stirred, making a soft, snuffling sound. I gave you a son, and now you want me to take the money and go to a beach house. I want you to be safe. Leo's jaw clenched. This world, my world, is violent. It is merciless. A child changes the calculus. You are a vulnerability I cannot afford to have exposed. So I'm a liability. You are a target, Leo corrected sharply. If my enemies know you mean something to me, they will not hesitate to use you to break me. She reached out and placed her hand over his on the mattress. His skin was rough, the knuckles still scabbed where her nails had dug in. Leo, she said, her voice steady, stripped of the fear that used to dictate her every interaction with him. Do you honestly think sending me to the Hamptons changes anything? Bradley Hayes made one stupid comment in a park, and you ruined his entire life. If your enemies are watching, they already know. Leo didn't speak. He stared at their hands. I am not leaving, she told him, squeezing his hand tightly. I am not taking the money, and I am not taking my son to a beach house to wait for a phone call telling me you've been shot in an alley. We are in this, together. Leo pulled his hand out from under hers. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the large window. He stared out at the snow-covered estate, his back rigid. You don't know what you're asking for, Chloe. You don't know the things I've done, the things I will have to do to keep this empire intact for him. He gestured blindly toward the bed. I don't care, she said, and it was the terrifying truth. She didn't care about the blood on his ledgers. She cared about the man who held her hand while their son took his first breath. Leo turned around. The harsh winter light hit his face, exposing the deep lines of exhaustion and the heavy, undeniable burden of his life. He walked slowly back to the bed. He didn't sit down. He leaned over, placing a hand on either side of her, trapping her in his shadow. He leaned down until his mouth was a breath away from hers. If you stay, Leo whispered, his voice a dark, velvet threat. There is no exit. There is no going back to a normal life. You are mine, completely and permanently. She didn't flinch. She looked directly into his cold, predatory eyes and saw the desperate human need underneath. I know, she breathed. Leo closed the distance, his mouth crushed against hers. It wasn't a gentle, romantic kiss. It was possessive, hard, and desperate. It tasted like ash and adrenaline and a dark, unbreakable promise. She tangled her fingers in his dark hair, pulling him closer, anchoring him to her just as he had anchored her the night before. He broke the kiss slowly, resting his forehead against hers. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. A tiny, high-pitched squawk came from the blankets between them. Leo pulled back. He looked down at Dominic, who had wriggled one small, furious arm out of the swaddle and was currently waving it at the ceiling. A low, rich chuckle rumbled in Leo's chest. The sound was so foreign, so entirely unexpected in this dark, silent house, that she felt a sudden burn of tears behind her eyes. Leo reached down and carefully tucked the tiny arm back into the blanket. He stroked Dominic's cheek with his scarred knuckle. He's going to be a problem, Leo murmured, his eyes full of a fierce, terrifying devotion. She leaned back against the pillows, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of gravity finally settle into place. Bradley had looked at her and seen a failure, a tragic consequence of letting herself go. He saw a fat, pathetic woman. He had no idea. She looked at the ruthless, untouchable king of the city's underworld, standing guard over her bed, completely captivated by the child she had just given him. She hadn't let herself go. She had let herself become untouchable. Some debts are settled in cash, but the most dangerous ones are settled in blood, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond. Chloe didn't just survive the ruthless world of Leo Moretti. She became the heart of it. If you loved this dark, grounded Mafia romance and want to see more stories where the underdog doesn't just win, but takes over the whole empire, smash that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a deeply human, gritty revenge story, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss our next series. Let me know in the comments, would you have stayed with Leo or taken the money and run? See you next time.